So we see from these examples that the person who is engaging in the manipulation doesn't have to be a narcissist or a psychopath. I gave examples really from everyday life that we see quite often. But when somebody is narcissistic and psychopathic, they're more likely to use one of those types of manipulation, to manipulate one or more emotions. And typically they target weaknesses. So if somebody has a mental disorder or another type of disorder or problem around emotional regulation, so if they have dysregulated emotions, somebody who's narcissistic or psychopathic would usually move toward a person like that because they know they're vulnerable in that area of emotions. They know that they have emotions that can move and change very quickly. So again, a person like that would be the kind of person that a narcissist or a psychopath would prefer to manipulate. It's just a lot easier. And this really gets into why individuals who are narcissistic and psychopathic are so successful at emotional manipulation. So as I pointed out, people that aren't in these categories can certainly manipulate emotions, but typically they're not very good at it. Individuals who are narcissistic and psychopathic tend to be more effective. And that's what I'm really getting at here. Why are they more effective? Well, one reason is they tend to be motivated. And motivation is really a strong indicator here. From those examples I gave before, with people that weren't necessarily psychopathic or narcissistic, they were also motivated. Somebody trying to sell you a house is motivated. Somebody trying to convict a defendant is motivated. But somebody who's narcissistic and psychopathic has a wider range of motivations. There's a lot of different types of behavior, a lot of different responses that motivate them. When people aren't narcissistic and psychopathic, what motivates them is really restricted to usually their job. Like the examples I gave there before, if somebody's trying to sell a house or a police officer is trying to get a confession, they're trying to do their job. So again, it's restricted to that type of area typically, without the personality traits of narcissism and psychopathy. Another reason that narcissists and psychopaths are so successful at manipulation is they lack empathy, and this is a real key. Even at the subclinical level here, even if somebody has narcissism and psychopathy but doesn't rise to the level of any type of disorder, any type of mental disorder, they're still going to have some lack of empathy, and that's going to be enough to facilitate emotional manipulation in some cases. Now we talk about specifically grandiose narcissism and psychopathy, so leaving out vulnerable narcissism for a moment. We see that individuals with grandiose narcissism and individuals who are psychopathic are not vulnerable to emotions, right? They're exempt from the rules. They're not invested. And this gets into what I call the trail of destruction. So imagine like an individual who's in a totally fireproof suit. It's not only fireproof, but it's resistant to heat. They can pour gasoline everywhere and play with matches. If something burns, they're okay with that. If something doesn't burn, they're okay with that too. Another expression here is they're playing with the house's money. So if they go into a casino and the people at the casino say, look, here's $10,000, but you have to gamble it, that's not a big deal. You're playing with the house's money. It's not your money. You're not losing anything. You're not risking anything. And that's kind of how we look at this. Grandiose narcissists and psychopaths don't have anything to lose because they're not vulnerable to emotions. They don't have to play by the same rules. They don't have a way to get hurt with the emotions the same as somebody who does not have those personality traits. Now, the last reason that narcissists and psychopaths can be successful with emotional manipulation is they tend to be attracted to the suffering of other people. Sometimes we call this schadenfreude, right? The joy in the suffering of others. Except with narcissism and psychopathy, it's a little more intense. And if somebody lacks empathy and they're not vulnerable to emotions and they like it when other people suffer, it makes sense, more or less, why they would use emotional manipulation. From their point of view, that's logical. It helps them to meet their goals. So when somebody realizes that emotional manipulation is occurring, how can it be stopped? How can we stop emotional manipulation from happening? Well, I talked about this in videos before. Boundaries. Boundaries are a real key. Follow the rules that you set. Follow the boundaries that you set before experiencing an emotion. So don't wait until a time when the emotions are strong to make those rules. Make those rules when the emotions are expressed at a relatively low level or there's no emotion. Now, when people fail to react to efforts to manipulate, that will eventually extinguish the behavior, right? So another tactic here would be to cut off the reward. So if somebody's trying to manipulate you and you react to that, that's only rewarding them for that attempt to manipulate. So we can think about it from the point of view of like operant conditioning, right? It goes back to the roots of behaviorism. If there's an animal being used in an experiment and they have to press a button to get a pellet of food, and every time they press that button, a pellet of food comes down, they're going to continue to press that button. If the reinforcement schedule is changed, so they have to press the button twice, they're still going to do it. They're going to press it twice and get the pellet of food. And this number can be increased quite a bit. They can have to press the button 10 times or 20 times, and they'll still do it because they know that eventually they're going to get that food. So the only way to really extinguish the behavior is to never reinforce it. It's really surprising how many times people will engage in behaviors without the reward because they know it's still possible. Now, I've heard another argument in this area that another tactic here would be to have the opposite reaction that the manipulator expects. But in my experience, this is still a reward. This is still a response, and it may not be the response the person wants, but it still may bring some sort of pleasure or be satisfactory. So I would say that's not always a good strategy. No reaction, I think, in terms of behaviorism, is a more effective strategy most of the time. Now, these ideas about how to avoid emotional manipulation, they're not the same thing as not having emotions. Rather, not engaging in a behavior, or at least not engaging in it when the person who's narcissistic or psychopathic or whoever they are can see you. If you have to react, if there's no way to kind of suppress that reaction, have that reaction in a place where you could not be observed by the person who is attempting the manipulation. Again, whether they're narcissistic, psychopathic, or not. That's still a way to avoid rewarding them.